learners. Today I will be talking about some basic aspects of climate change. This is a part of the course MEV 001. I am Professor Bhaskar from School of Sciences, IGNOU, New Delhi. You are all aware that humans have been altering the chemistry of the atmosphere on a global scale. For example, you must be familiar with the ozone layer depletion, climate change, acid rain. In fact, man is an anthropogenic agent and he has been causing lot of damage due to the developmental activities which are being undertaken. Global climate refers to the state of the world's climate. Now, why do climatologists study the global climate? They study for specific goals. For example, whether there is evidence for climate change. Now, before we go to the actual issue of human-induced climate change, some basic facts has to be known. The quantity of energy received by the planet from the sun has a significant impact on global change. What this means is that throughout the geological history of the earth, it has not been the same. It also impacts on how energy is stored and transferred through the atmosphere and oceans of the earth. You also know, you must have read in the geography books, that the climate is also influenced by the positions of the world's continent and huge mountain ranges. Now, we come back to the question, what is really climate change? Now, you can see the definition which is given by UNFCCC, United Nations Framework on Climate Change, which was an international treaty adopted in 1992. They define climate change as a means of change of climate which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, which is in addition to the natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods. What is the meaning of this? That means human activity is changing the climate in addition to natural climate variability which is observed. Now, weather and climate, we tend to use these words interchangeably, but are they same or different? Weather is different and climate is different. The average state of weather patterns across a given area is referred to as climate. When examining a place, climate or weather conditions, variables are same, but normally the climate considers them over a longer period of time. For example, to generate credible averages, a minimum of 35 years of weather records are required. Now, as I said earlier, they are not interchangeable. When we talk of weather, that includes the daily conditions of the atmosphere at any location in terms of temperature, rainfall, winds, humidity, sunshine, cloudiness and other factors. You must have read these terms in the newspaper weather column. Now, there is an important assessment made in the IPCC 2007. What is here important, why I am mentioning here, is they identified that the climate change may be due to internal process or external forcings. Now, some external influences, for example, solar radiation, they can vary. Volcanism, it can occur naturally and can contribute to the total natural variability of the climate system. What this means is that even if there is no greenhouse gases, still there can be variation in the climate. Other external changes can be that human activity, for example, after the Industrial Revolution, increase the greenhouse gases and that caused climate change. Now, what is the objective is to understand what climate change has resulted from anthropogenic activities compared to the natural internal climate variation which occurs. Now, weather and climate, if you see, we are seeing the impacts of climate change on our weather. You must have heard of news, extreme rain in Kerala, for example, we had, in Uttarakhand we had, or extreme variation in temperatures. For example, Europe experienced hot summers, or there are some forest fires unusual. Weather and climate both are affected by the same variables: directedness of sun rays, length of the day, altitude, distribution of land and water bodies, direction of mountain ranges, air pressure, winds and ocean current. But when we talk climate, it is the average for a very long period of 3 decades or so. Now, when we talk of climate, it is an average of 3 decades or so. Now, natural and anthropogenic drivers of climate change, if you see, climate has been changing since earth formation. There have been glacial and interglacial periods, but human activities after the industrial era has resulted in increase of greenhouse gases, and that resulted in increase of temperature. Now, are there any linkages with human activities? Now, we see that whenever any event occurs, we call them extreme events linked to climate change. Now, how do we know that this is related to human made emissions? For example, the science has advanced that we can now follow the link between the temperature and the accumulation of greenhouse gases that are trapped in the atmosphere, which are emitted as a result of human activity. Now, science is able to give the links between them. If you see this graph which I am showing, you can see post industrialization there has been a dramatic rise in carbon dioxide. Somewhere it was before that 250, 280 ppm. Now it has crossed 410 ppm. So you can see that the rapid rise has taken place post industrial period. Also, in the geological history, if you see the same graph, there were variations in carbon dioxide. That is why there were glacial and interglacial cycles, ice age cycles. Now, there is a direct relation in this graph you can see between temperature change and the carbon dioxide increase or greenhouse gas increase. Now, this IPCC report 2021 is very important, and they brought out a new report, Climate Change 2021, the physical science basis, and they compiled all the recent understanding about climate change. The results are very grave. What is the opening line? It is very important. The opening line reads that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean and land. That means that humans have become geological agents. Humans have that is why this period is called Anthropocene. Man has become dominant, that he has started influencing the atmosphere, ocean and land. Now, this report was accepted and approved by 195 national government, that it is humans who are causing this change what we are observing. What is the report saying? That the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is highest in the last 2 million years, what we observed. Sea level rise is fastest in the last 3000 years, and Arctic sea ice is at the lowest level in last 1000 years. You can see this source we have taken from IPCC report, which says carbon dioxide concentration is highest in at least last 2 million years. Sea level rise is fastest in at least last 3000 years. Antarctic sea ice area is lowest in the last 1000 years, and there is retreat of glaciers unprecedented in the last 2000 years. Now, the question is, what is global warming? Global warming means the gradual increase in average temperature of the atmosphere. Why this should occur? Because there is an increase in greenhouse gases concentration. The heat loss from the earth to space is slowed down because of the increase in greenhouse gas concentration. Now, what are the sources of these greenhouse gases? If we say humans are contributing, what activities of humans are contributing to these gases? Carbon dioxide, for example, fossil fuel combustion and deforestation. That is why we are seeing that it is important to phase out fossil fuels. Nitrous oxides, again fertilizers, fossil fuels and biomass burning are the source. Methane is another greenhouse gas which has a great greenhouse warming potential. This is reported in swamps, marshes, paddy fields, wetlands, livestock, natural gas leaks, fermentation from enteric process of animals, that is in the alimentary canal, biomass burning. Then also there is chlorofluorocarbons, aerosols, plastic foams, industrial solvents, air conditioning, refrigeration. Due to this Montreal Protocol, we have banned the CFCs, and that has done a double benefit. Not only ozone hole depletion is reduced or controlled, we also can control the greenhouse gas concentration, thereby the climate change. Now, what is this greenhouse? If you see this diagram, you can see sunlight falls on the earth and it is reflected back, and if there is greenhouse, it can be blocked, because when the reflected rays go back, the greenhouse gases can absorb them. Thicker the greenhouse gas or more concentration, more will be the absorption. What is important here is that the incoming radiation is in the visible part of the spectrum. The visible light passes through the atmosphere without being absorbed, but when the earth radiates back towards the space, when warmed up, earth gets warmed up and it radiates, and this is in the longer wavelength, and much of this radiation do not escape into space, because in the gases in the atmosphere are there like carbon dioxide, water vapor, greenhouse gases which are there, which can trap them and results in warming of the earth. If there were no greenhouse gases, then the earth would be very colder than what it is now. So little bit of greenhouse gas is a good thing, but when the greenhouse gas concentration gets higher, then the warming of the planets take place. This is what is shown in this diagram. When there is reflection after heating, it becomes infrared radiation, long wavelength radiation, and when it is reflected back, the gases in the atmosphere absorb them and do not allow them to pass through back to the space, and that results in the warming of the planet. Now, what are the effects of the global warming? Let us say what can be the side effects of this. First and foremost is biodiversity loss. I need not talk about this. You have already listened to so many lectures about biodiversity. There should be a change in the rainfall and monsoon patterns. You are already seeing unseasonal rainfall occurring, melting of ice cap and glaciers. There can be increasing temperatures which can cause thermal expansion of oceans and sea levels. They can affect the ecosystems. They can disrupt the marine ecosystem. They can flood the coastal wetlands. You can also have frequent storms in many regions where storms are never experienced. Flood can result in the spread of infectious diseases. Groundwater can get contaminated. It is important to note that quantities of the greenhouse gas are greatest in the last 2 million years, and the earth has warmed by around 1.1 degree since the late 1800. What is important, it is not only a simple case of temperature rise. Earth is an interconnected system. When temperature rise take place, the atmosphere, the biosphere, the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, the cryosphere all get affected, as Earth is one system and all these systems are interconnected. Now, how are the oceans changing because of these kind of activities or these kind of actions? Water gets warmed up, and surface water of the tropical ocean has warmed up 0.5 to 0.7 degree over the last 2 to 3 decades. Temperature spikes are higher than normal. What will happen if the temperature is more? The biochemical activity of organism can change. Water becomes acidic. Now carbon dioxide get dissolved in the ocean and forming carbonic acid and reducing the pH of water. What will happen if the carbon dioxide gets dissolved or the pH acidity increases? Most of the organisms, their shells are made up of calcium carbonate, and they would get attacked by these. You could have bleaching of corals and other things because of this. Ice melting can also take place because of climate change. What happens if there is less ice in the polar ecosystems? Then so many factors relating to sunlight, reflection, all these get affected and ecosystems can get disturbed. Now, there are some important international agreements. For example, Kyoto Protocol was formulated in 1997 in Japan, which focused on reducing carbon emissions by 50% or to the pre-1990 levels. This was an important agreement. Now, we have seen that recently COP26 took place, and why this is so crucial. COP26 is the Conference of Parties to the UN Framework on Climate Convention on Climate Change, and it's in its 26th iteration, and this brings together 197 members to take coordinated action on climate change. Now, what is the outcome of this? As per the UN climate press release, some consensus has been reached. Adaptation, mitigation, finance are all strengthened in a complex and delicate balance supported by all parties. This is one of the achievements. Then the second important one is, after 6 years of strenuous negotiations, pending items that prevented full implementation of the Paris Agreement on carbon markets and transparency have been finally approved. So we have made some progress and we have kept the goal of 1.5 degree target alive, though there is lot of work on the ground to be done. Now climate change has lot of complex interactions. It affects the economy, it affects the environment, it affects social factors like migration, poverty, etc. It affects the governance, institutionals, then it are drivers of conflict, and there are lot of tensions also can be caused because this can result in drought, famine, etc. So these are very complex. If you see, climate change and ecosystem services are directly linked. If the ecosystem services on which humans depend get affected, then there will be impact on the humans. So the entire cycle of ecosystem services can get affected, and we benefit a lot from biodiversity and natural ecosystem services. Now climate change is a very complex issue, and it affects various aspects. You must have seen in the newspapers, whenever prime ministers and presidents meet, they normally talk of two issues. Normally it is climate change and terrorism. Climate change has occupied the center stage. Climate change affects the international politics, it affects the economics, it affects the migration, it affects the human rights, it affects the development, it affects the trade, it affects the health, it affects the environmental systems. It is a really complex issue, and this requires global cooperation to handle this. Now, as an individual, what we can do in this? We can make a small contribution. For example, we can choose to use clean energy, we can use smart transportation, mass transportation, proper land use, we can increase forestation, plantation because they are sinks. Then we can learn more about the science behind our climate dilemma. We can calculate our carbon footprint. We can eat more plant-based meals, compose the leftovers and reduce food waste. We can support firms that are committed to sustainability. Now, why all of these occurs? There is a common theory which is called tragedy of commons. Why these occurs? Because environmental degradation occurs because overuse and misuse of common property resources. For example, oceans, air are free of cost and are owned by nobody. When they are owned by nobody, they tend to be abused, and this was referred to as tragedy of commons by biologist Garrett Hardin in 1968. Now, what are the conclusions? The increasing complexity of environmental problem requires an enhanced capacity for scientific awareness, assessment and monitoring. It is absolutely necessary to sensitize about the importance of our environment right from school children to adults, as our approach to environmental issues is the way we treat our environment and is basically an attitude towards way of living. Our lifestyle contributes to a great extent. Then public awareness is very important. Their participation. No environmental program can be successful without public participation. Political will of the government is very important to bring the desired changes. Greening of the mind, body and soul is essential if we have to safely hand over Mother Earth to future generations. No doubt, just like COVID, rather more than COVID, I would say, leaders of the world must join hands to tackle this climate issue. In fact, I would say climate change is the mother of all scientific battles for mankind. There is an urgent need for new analytical approaches and models, for new policy instruments, innovative way of thinking regarding climate change, increased funding for teaching, research and outreach activity. I would end my talk with an important statement, very important and relevant statement by Mahatma Gandhi ji, who said, "There is enough on this planet for everybody's need, but not for anybody's greed." Thank you very much, listeners, for patiently listening to me. Thank you very much.